The emerald and gold corridors of the Zavari royal palace gleamed under the luminescent ceiling panels, casting ethereal shadows that danced across walls, carved from precious stones, mined from the deepest caverns of their homeworld. Xander Earth's diplomatic representative stumbled through these alien halls, his once pristine diplomatic uniform now stained with blood and torn at the seams. Shackles clinked against his wrists as the armored guards flanked him on either side, their plasma spears held at the ready. The peace negotiations had crumbled, like an ancient relic, leaving behind only the bitter taste of failure and the echo of angry voices that had filled the conference chamber mere hours before. Queen Valina sat upon her crystalline throne, her silver skin reflecting the ambient light of the palace, like moonlight on water. Her obsidian eyes, fixed upon the human prisoner, with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. The ornate chamber fell silent, except for the soft humming of the life support systems that maintained the perfect atmosphere for Zavari physiology. Tapestries depicting the glorious conquests of her ancestors adorned the walls, each thread woven with precious metals that told stories of a proud and unyielding people. "Bring forth the crown of truth," Valina commanded, her voice carrying the weight of centuries of royal authority. Her counselors exchanged glances, some raising their eyebrow ridges in surprise. The crown of truth was sacred to the Zavari lineage, an artifact that had not responded to anyone in over 300 years. It was said to reveal the innermost nature of those who came before it, to judge worthiness and truth with an ancient wisdom that predated their civilization. The ceremonial guards approached with measured steps, carrying an ornate box crafted from the same emerald stone as the palace walls. As they opened it, a crown unlike anything Xander had ever seen was revealed. It appeared to be made of living light crystalline formations that seemed to pulse with an inner fire connected by delicate filaments that looked like captured starlight. The very air around it shimmered with an otherworldly energy that made his skin tingle despite his restraints. Xander straightened his shoulders, meeting the Queen's gaze with unflinching determination despite his precarious situation. "Your Majesty," he began, his voice steady despite the gravity of his circumstances. "I came here as an ambassador of peace. The breakdown of negotiations was not due to any deception on Earth's part, but rather a fundamental misunderstanding that could still be resolved through dialogue." The Queen's expression remained impassive as she studied him. "The time for words has passed, human. Your species has shown its true nature through actions that speak louder than any diplomatic rhetoric." She gestured for the guards to bring the crown closer to Xander. "This sacred artifact will reveal what lies beneath your carefully crafted facade." As the crown of truth was brought within arm's reach of the bound human, something extraordinary happened. The crystalline formations began to emit a brilliant light, far brighter than the soft glow they had maintained for centuries. The entire chamber was bathed in radiant luminescence that caused many of the Zavari nobles to shield their eyes. Gasps echoed through the throne room as the crown pulsed with energy, its light reflecting off every surface and creating a kaleidoscope of colors that had never been seen before. Queen Valina rose from her throne, her composure cracking for the first time in decades. The crown had not merely responded to the human, it had come alive with a vitality that suggested recognition, perhaps even acceptance. Murmurs of disbelief rippled through the assembled court, as ancient protocols and beliefs were suddenly called into question. "Impossible," whispered Malik. The Queen's closest advisor, his scarred features twisted with disapproval. "The crown chooses only from the royal bloodline. This human contamination must be the result of some technological trickery." His voice carried the weight of conservative tradition and a deep-seated xenophobia that had shaped Zavari policy for generations. Xander felt a strange sensation as the crown's light washed over him, as if every cell in his body was being examined and found worthy by some cosmic judge. The energy was warm, welcoming, even filling him with a sense of belonging that seemed impossible given his circumstances. I assure you, I carry no technology capable of such deception, he said, his voice carrying a new authority that seemed to resonate with the crown's emanations. The Queen's scientists were summoned, immediately led by Dr. Evan, whose research into ancient Zavari genetics had made him one of the most respected scholars in the Empire. As he approached with his scanning devices, the crown's glow intensified further, creating patterns of light that corresponded to Xander's genetic structure in ways that defied conventional understanding. Over the following days, Xander found himself moved from the dungeons to what the Zavari called a golden cage within the palace proper. His quarters, while luxurious by most standards, were clearly designed to contain rather than host. The walls were embedded with monitoring devices disguised as decorative elements, and guards stood constant watch outside his door. Yet within these confines, he began to immerse himself in Zavari culture and language, with a dedication that surprised even himself. The Zavari language was complex with tonal variations that conveyed emotional subtleties impossible to capture in mere words. Xander discovered that each syllable carried layers of meaning, and that true communication required an understanding of context that went beyond mere vocabulary. He spent hours practicing with the digital archives provided to him, beginning to appreciate the sophisticated poetry and philosophical works that formed the backbone of Zavari civilization. Queen Valina found herself visiting Xander's quarters with increasing frequency, ostensibly to observe the humans' adaptation to their ways, but increasingly drawn by curiosity about this being who had awakened an artifact that had slumbered for centuries. Their conversations began formally, with careful diplomatic exchanges, but gradually evolved into something more personal, as they discovered unexpected common ground. "Your people have a saying," Valina observed during one such visit, her posture more relaxed than royal protocol typically allowed, "that those who cannot learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Yet it seems to me that sometimes the past can blind us to possibilities that our ancestors never imagined." Xander nodded thoughtfully, setting aside the Zavari philosophical text he had been reading. "On Earth we have a similar concept, but we also believe that wisdom comes not from blindly following tradition, but from understanding why those traditions developed and whether they still serve us in a changing world." These philosophical discussions became the foundation of a growing mutual respect that transcended the boundaries of species and circumstance. Valina began to see beyond the human exterior, to the mind and spirit within, while Xander gained insight into the fears and responsibilities that shaped a queen's decisions. The crown, whenever it was brought for observation, continued to glow with undimmed intensity, as if affirming the connection forming between them. Dr. Evans' research revealed startling findings that shook the very foundations of Zavari understanding of their own history. Deep genetic analysis revealed markers in Xander's DNA that resonated with ancient Zavari genetic sequences, suggesting a connection that predated recorded history. "The implications are staggering," he reported to the Queen and her council. "It appears that at some point in the distant past, there was intermingling between our species, leaving traces that have been preserved across millennia." As weeks turned to months, the relationship between Xander and Valina deepened, beyond political necessity or royal curiosity. They found themselves sharing not just ideas, but emotions, dreams, and fears that they had never expressed to another living being. The cultural barriers that had seemed insurmountable began to crumble as they discovered the fundamental similarities that existed beneath the surface differences. Malik watched these developments with growing alarm and disgust. The conservative advisor had built his career on maintaining Zavari purity and superiority, and the thought of their queen being influenced by an alien prisoner, let alone developing feelings for one, threatened everything he stood for. In secret, he began gathering support among the more traditional elements of the nobility, feeding their fears about contamination of their sacred bloodline and the dilution of Zavari supremacy. The conspiracy took shape gradually, with Malik skillfully manipulating long-standing prejudices and using the crown's unprecedented behavior as evidence of some form of alien corruption. He painted Xander not as a bridge between worlds, but as a threat to the very essence of Zavari identity. The human has somehow corrupted our most sacred relic, he argued in whispered meetings with like-minded nobles. If we allow this contamination to continue, it will destroy everything our ancestors built. Captain Krav, the loyal guard commander, who had served the royal family for decades, began to notice the increased activity among certain noble houses. His military instincts warned him of brewing trouble, but the conspiracy was too subtle for him to take direct action without concrete evidence. He began his own quiet investigation, building a network of loyal guards and officers who could be trusted when the inevitable confrontation came. Councillor Thalia, a progressive voice on the council who had long advocated for more open relations with other species, sensed the shifting political currents. She began working behind the scenes to protect both the Queen and Xander, carefully documenting Malik's activities while building support among the more moderate members of the nobility. The coup, when it came, was swift and brutal. Malik had timed it perfectly, striking during a traditional ceremony when the royal guard was divided between ceremonial duties and actual security. Loyal guardsmen were overwhelmed or betrayed by their own colleagues who had been turned to Malik's cause through a combination of bribery, blackmail, and appeals to tradition. Queen Valina and Xander were seized in the palace gardens where they had been walking among the eternal blooms, a species of flower that represented the enduring nature of Zavari civilization. The irony was not lost on either of them, as they were dragged away from symbols of permanence into an uncertain future. The dungeons beneath the palace were a stark contrast to the beauty above. Carved from raw stone and cooled by subterranean currents, they spoke of a time when the Zavari were a more brutal people, when justice was swift and mercy rare. Chained to the walls of adjacent cells, Valina and Xander found themselves facing what seemed certain death, with Malik already declaring himself regent and promising to restore Zavari purity. In those dark hours before dawn, with execution scheduled for the next morning, they spoke words that had been building between them for months. "If I must die," Valina whispered, her voice carrying a tenderness that no royal protocol had ever taught her. "I am grateful that I was able to experience something my ancestors never knew, something the crown recognized before I did." Xander reached through the narrow gap between their cells, managing to clasp her fingertips with his own. "The crown didn't choose me," he said softly. "It recognized what was already there, what has been there perhaps since the first Zavarian human looked up at the same stars and wondered if they were alone." Their words became vows spoken not before witnesses or with official sanction, but in the depths of a prison with only the ancient stones to hear them. They pledged themselves to each other across the gulf of species and circumstance, creating a bond that transcended the political machinations above. Captain Krav had not been idle during the hours since the coup. Working with a network of officers who had remained loyal to the crown, he had been quietly gathering intelligence about Malik's support and the disposition of forces throughout the palace. Councillor Thalia, maintaining her position through careful political maneuvering, had managed to stay close to Malik's inner circle while secretly feeding information to the resistance. The rescue came at the darkest hour, just before the pale Zavari dawn would break over the palace spires. Krav and his loyalists moved through the palace like shadows, using their intimate knowledge of the building's layout to avoid patrols and security systems that had been programmed to respond to Malik's new authority. The fighting was brutal, but brief, as surprise and righteous fury gave the loyalists an advantage that no amount of preparation could counter. The battle for the council chambers became the decisive moment of the counter-coup. Malik had gathered his supporters there, believing the ancient ceremonial space would legitimize his rule through its association with past glories. But when Krav and his forces burst through the great doors, bringing with them Queen Valina and Xander, the crown blazing with unprecedented light in Xander's presence, the psychological impact shattered Malik's coalition. Many of the nobles who had supported the coup out of fear or conservative tradition found themselves wavering when faced with the undeniable evidence of the crown's choice. The artifact's light seemed to fill the chamber with judgment, revealing the truth of each person's motivations and loyalties with uncomfortable clarity. Malik himself proved more resilient than his supporters, drawing an ancient ceremonial blade and challenging Xander to single combat, claiming the right of trial by battle under old Zavari law. "You are an abomination," he snarled, his facade of civilized advisor stripped away to reveal the fanatic beneath. "I will not allow alien filth to pollute our sacred lineage." The combat was fierce, but ultimately one-sided. Xander, despite his diplomatic background, had received military training as part of his preparation for dangerous assignments. More importantly, he fought with a strength that came from defending not just his own life, but the future he and Valina had envisioned together. When Malik fell, it was with the crown's light, reflecting in his dying eyes, perhaps finally showing him the truth he had spent so long denying. The aftermath of the failed coup saw sweeping changes throughout Zavari society. Malik's supporters were exiled rather than executed, Valina choosing mercy over vengeance in a demonstration of the new direction she intended for her people. The conservative faction found their influence greatly diminished, while progressive voices like Thalia's gained new prominence in government. The formal ceremony recognizing Xander as consort was unlike anything in Zavari history. Traditional elements were woven together with new rituals that acknowledged the unprecedented nature of the union. The crown played a central role, its continuous glow serving as a divine endorsement that even the most stubborn traditionalists could not deny. Dr. Evans' continued research had revealed that the connection between Xander and the crown went beyond simple genetic compatibility. The artifact appeared to respond to something deeper, a harmony of purpose and spirit that transcended biological boundaries. "It seems," he reported to the assembled court, "that the crown was waiting not for a specific bloodline, but for a specific moment in history when Zavari and human destinies would intertwine." The announcement of the Human-Zavari alliance sent shockwaves throughout both civilizations. Neither species had ever formed such an intimate political and cultural bond with another intelligent race. The union of their leaders became a symbol of what was possible when differences were embraced rather than feared. Queen Valina and human consort Xander established their residence in the Eternal Gardens, where bioluminescent plants from a dozen worlds created a living testament to the beauty that could emerge from diversity. They walked these paths daily, often accompanied by delegations from both worlds, who came to learn from their example. The crown, which had once been a symbol of exclusivity and racial purity, became something entirely different. In Xander's presence, it evolved into a beacon of unity, its light serving as a reminder that truth and worthiness could transcend the boundaries that separated species and cultures. The new age of cooperation brought unprecedented advances in science, art, and philosophy, as human and Zavari minds worked together toward common goals. The technologies that had once been zealously guarded were now shared freely, leading to innovations that neither species could have achieved alone. Years later, historians would mark this as the moment when both civilizations truly began to reach their potential. The crown's choice had seemed impossible, even heretical to many at the time. But its wisdom had proven greater than the narrow vision of those who sought to constrain it within the limits of tradition and prejudice. In the Eternal Gardens, where flowers bloomed in colors that had no names in either language, Valina and Xander continued to build their impossible dream. Their love had become more than a personal triumph. It had become the foundation of a new era, proof that the greatest truths often emerge from the most unexpected places, and that the heart of a crown, like the heart of a person, knows no boundaries when recognizing what is truly worthy of its embrace. The crown continued to glow, its light now understood not as a judgment passed, but as a promise kept, a bridge built between worlds that had long existed in isolation. In its radiance, Both species found the reflection of their highest aspirations, and in the union, it had blessed they found the path toward a future neither could have imagined alone. As the twin suns of the Zavari system set beyond the palace spires, casting the eternal gardens in hues of gold and amber, the crown's light seemed to pulse in rhythm with the heartbeats of its chosen bearers. The impossible had become reality, tradition had been transformed without being destroyed, and the universe had grown a little smaller, a little brighter, through the simple act of recognizing truth wherever it might be found.